Okay.
Is it running?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. This first sections, it's two of them actually. We're gonna do them more or less together, me and Simon. We are going to talk a bit about the technical side of the product identity manager and the components, and we're going to look at some of the tools, of course. And after that section, we're going to look at uh, some tips and tricks and hints when you're talking to your customers about it, of course. And that's pretty much it from me and Simon this morning. Uh, so, uh, the identity manager, it actually has not that many components. As you already heard yesterday, the identity manager solution needs a database, a relational database, and we are a bit picky on the what databases we support for the central repository of the solution. It needs to be a Microsoft SQL database. There's one exception from that, but if you want to do your own installation in your own lab on your own machines, you need a SQL Server, and you need at least a standard edition of SQL Server. Um, for larger installations using SQL Server, it's recommended to use the Enterprise edition of SQL Server, and any customer will then tell you that's pretty expensive, uh, but it is also going to be slightly better performance if you have the Enterprise edition. Now, if you use a cloud environment for your infrastructure, you can use in Azure, you can use the SQL service, which is SQL Server as a service within Azure, and also the managed SQL instance if you have the business critical tier, which is also very expensive. If you run this in in AWS, we also support the relational database service called RDS. So that's the exception from being a Microsoft service. It's mimicking a Microsoft SQL service. So very simple. You need a database. It has to be, if you install it yourself, it needs to be the Microsoft SQL Server. And it's not that we do not support the free version of SQL Server. It doesn't really work, actually. You have to have at least a standard edition of this. Otherwise, it won't be possible to even install the product. Now, so obviously the database is the central part of it, and we don't provide the database, of course, so the customer needs to provide the database itself. And then we have something, a component called the Identity Manager Service. That is almost always referred to as the job server. A job server is literally, if you install it on a Windows machine, it is a Windows service. And the job server is crucial. You need to have at least one job server. If you don't have any job servers, then you don't have a functional installation. And the job server, it can process tasks, things that needs to be executed outside of the database, but it also runs the connectors. And obviously you can have more than one job server. I'm going to show you some examples in a couple of slides on how you can deploy this and how you can have multiple job servers if you so wish. So if you have the database and at least one job server, and that job server needs to have the role of talking to the database. If you have that, then you have a running identity manager. However, you can only use the provided tooling because in order for your users and your business users to be able to access it, and in order for you to be able to provide API endpoints and so on, you need to install some web applications. And we have two web applications with the product. One is called the application server, and the other one is called the API server. Now, the application server, you need to have it. It's not an application in a traditional sense if you use, for instance, a Java platform where an application server literally executes code, right? It's just named application server, and it provides some services. First of all, it provides the low-level API endpoints, it will be the search indexer. It will index searches from the web portal, and it can also serve as a proxy. And it can serve as a proxy for job servers, and it can serve as a proxy for the API server. So for the web access. So you can use it to build a three-tier implementation if you so wish. And the second web application is the API server. And the API server, when you install it and you don't do any, if you do a vanilla installation, it will literally deploy 4 different web applications. The first one is the web portal, the standard web portal for all users. That's running on the API server. And then we have an operations support portal, which is literally, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a web-based interface to monitor and make sure that the implementation is running. You can look at logs, you can look at a lot of things from the operations support portal. And then in the same way as the application server provides APIs, you remember Simon talked about low-level API endpoints, which is literally, if you don't know anything about the data structure, it's probably quite hard to use the low-level API endpoint. On the API server, we have the business or high-level API endpoints. And those are the API endpoints that actually are used by the web portals, the web applications on the API server. And there's also an administration portal on the API server, and that is to configure and monitor and look at logs and so on the API server itself. So if you want to change some settings in the web portal, for instance, you do that from that administration portal. And as we mentioned,
is that we saw yesterday, excuse me, we saw yesterday the password portal, which is another application.
You're right. Also, I forgot about that one. Need to fix that. You're absolutely right.
But it's also using the API server instance as an application.
Yeah, that's a big mistake. That should be there as well. So obviously, that's also an application running on the API server for the password self-service, and you can deploy multiple API servers, of course, right? And finally, thank you, Simon, by the way. And finally, of course, as you heard Simon say yesterday, this is not a product where you normally or very seldom open up complex XML documents to try to configure or change the behavior. We do everything from the tools that comes with the product. And most of the tools are graphical, but some of them are also command lines, so you can use them to build scripts to do something with these tools if you so wish, right? Now, as I mentioned, these components, you can install everything in one single machine. Technically, that's actually almost completely true when it comes to this online demo center environment, this Bootcamp lab that we are using that you have access to as well. We have everything running on one machine, one server. So we have the SQL Server database, we have a job server, and we have the IIS running. So we have deployed the application server and the API server. Now, the tools we have installed on the client machine in this lab, but you can have the tools installed on one single box if you so wish. So you can have your own portable identity manager deployment. Just one virtual machine, you have everything if you so wish. Obviously, that's fine for development and test and trying stuff, but in any kind of deployment where it's a production environment, no, you don't have everything on one box, of course. But there's nothing preventing you from running everything on one box, right? So a typical way of deploying Identity Manager is that you deploy your database. Now, if that's your SQL Server that you have installed, or it's a database hotel, or if it's the DB service in Azure or the DB service inside AWS, it doesn't really matter. If you have the database and the job server deployed, and obviously also install the Identity Manager application, because that will set up this database structure inside the database. If you have these two components, then you can argue and say, I have an Identity Manager running, and which is absolutely true. And fun enough, we do have some customers that never provides any end user interface or APIs or anything for that. They just want to have something that manages their life cycle. That's pretty much what you can do if you if you don't provide any end user interface. So if you have this in place, you have a running identity manager. And obviously, and maybe you heard Susanne saying that yesterday, and definitely heard Simon saying that this database will actually contain not only the customer's data, it will contain all the configuration and all the objects inside the solution itself. So you could argue and say if you take a backup of this database, you have a disaster recovery backup, and that is to a very large extent true. And of course, you should take a backup of your database, right? The customer should have backups plans, of course, right? So if you have these two components running, then you have an identity manager running. Now, if you then install the application server or multiple instances, if you so wish, and then you could start deploying it as a service, which is very good practice regardless, because any customer, they probably have more than one data center, and the data center may be their own data centers, or they may be infrastructure as service from different vendors. They have their machines running in Azure, or they are running in AWS, or whatever, Google, whatever cloud provider they use for their own data centers. So then you can install job server or job service inside those different data centers where you have your target systems, or where the customer have their target systems, and you can configure those job servers to use the application servers as proxies. As a result, you do not have to open up any firewalls for inbound traffic for this solution, because these job servers will use a pull mechanism. They will pull through the application server and see, is there anything for me to do right now? And they will typically, as default, they will do it every 90 seconds. That's typically a configuration parameter that will tweak a bit. In this online demo center lab, I think we brought it down to 10 or 15 seconds.
I think it's 10 or 15, and I'll be honest, that's most probably one of the first things I do for a demo environment or a POC environment is I'll definitely set it to 10 or 15 seconds rather than a production environment, which would be set at 90 seconds.
Yeah, in a production, it doesn't really matter. But if you're running demos in front of a customer, you want them to see that things are actually happening. Then you don't want the job server to wait for 1.5 minutes before it pulls new things to, for instance, provisioning or change user accounts or assign entitlements, whatever the job server is doing. So if you have this in place, then you also can take care of lifecycle management, of course. And the good thing about the design here is that this is literally what we provide when we provide Identity Manager as a service. That's called Identity Manager on Demand. We provide the things on the left-hand side here. And then the customers needs to install one or more job servers where they have their target systems and the resources. So that's how we do it. And obviously, what's lacking from this picture is, of course, how do we provide user access to it? Well, that's when we install one or more API service, of course. And if you want to do this properly, the API service should use the application service as proxy, so they don't necessarily talk directly to the database. Now, if you deploy it like this, you could argue and say, I have a full deployment and I have a couple of data centers, and it may be that this service is running in one of those two data centers, of course, and we provide end user access, we provide also tool access, we provide the operation support portal, we provide password self-service, and anything that they want to have as the users. And now, obviously, the users could also be accessing the solution from any kind of location, of course. So that's sort of, here I have the password reset portal, at least, Simon, on the screen here. So obviously, this is very often the way we deploy the Identity Manager. Any questions or comment on this from the crowd?
There's nothing in the chat.
Yeah.
But anyone?
It's obviously crystal clear then. So
the only thing I'd add to that is that obviously those tools you mentioned earlier on, and how would they, if they were off from trying to access that IGA service that's in the cloud somewhere, how would they access it? Would they go to the database or would they go to the API server?
Application server.
Application server, sorry.
Yeah. Well, they will typically go through the application server, of course. Now, this is sort of, I would argue and say, sort of a best practice to deploy it. It needs to be in a production environment. You can't have everything running on one machine anyway. I don't think we even support that. You need to separate the components, but this is a good way of separating the components. Now, from this, we're going to talk about some of the core things about Identity Manager. And one of the absolute core things about Identity Manager, and this is as soon as you want to configure or do anything with Identity Manager, it's, I would say, crucial to understand that Identity Manager is an event-driven platform. And you saw Simon yesterday showing, for instance, that you could, in a workflow, issue an event. Now, there is a lot of events happening inside Identity Manager, and as soon as you change, for instance, an identity record, if you update the last name or if you create an identity record, it will fire off events, and it will fire off events like insert or update or even delete events. Now, there is a lot of other events. We're going to take a look at it in a bit. But obviously, since this is an identity management platform, we do have insert event, update event, and delete events, right? Now, as soon as an event has been issued, we have the internal processing mechanism called process change. These are technical workflows, and the product has quite a few of them. There's a lot of out-of-the-box technical workflows in the product. They are called process change. And a process chain typically listens to or subscribes to events and say, I'm interested in these events. And if an event occurs, the first thing a process chain will do is to evaluate, should I or should I not execute? Am I going to run or not? And if that evaluation calculates a true value, yes, I am going to run, then that process chain will start to execute. And this is literally technical and also graphical technical workflows. And these process steps inside a workflow like that could typically tell a job server to create a user or update a user account in a target system or assign an entitlement to or create an entitlement in a target system. It could do almost anything. So once you get the hang of this event model and the process change, then you realize, oh, I need to change or modify something. It's this event and it's this process chain. Maybe I would like to understand what it does or even change its behavior. Now, the built-in process change, you cannot really change them. What you can do, you can make a copy of an existing process chain, and then you could tell, and then it will actually do that through a very simple wizard, and it will ask you, do you want to disable the existing one and enable your copy? And if you do that, you have your own process chain. At first, it will do exactly the same as the built-in one, but then you can modify that process chain so it does something else. I will show you later an example of that. And this is also where you are going to find that it's not that much that's really hard-coded in this solution. You can change the behavior of the product, and you can definitely configure custom process chains to perform certain things that's not standard in the product, of course. And if you create your own versions of, or you create your own process chains, They are not going to be deleted or anything if you apply a new version of Identity Manager, of course, right? So
I'll say
that's
that's good practice, is to take the copy so that it
yeah,
doesn't get overwritten, when you do an upgrade.
Yeah, you can't really change the built-in one, so you have to.
Some you can, but
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's a good practice. Keep
Exactly.
that in mind, right? And secondly, it's in a completely asynchronous platform, which means that anything that a job server or a process chain initiates, for instance, it's not going to be executed. It will be put into a queue, and then it will be executed. And there are two types of queues inside the Identity Manager. There's an internal queue called a DB queue, and then there is queues for every job server that you install. And this can be a bit tricky because you can literally have more than one queue on one physical job server. In this lab, we have two job servers, but they only have one queue each. So it's very simple in that way. Now, once a job is in a job queue, it will be picked up by the job server. And the job server, if it, for instance, fails, it will typically, perhaps, depending on what it is, it will do retries. And if it will fail after the retries has timed out, the job will typically go into its configuration options, but the typical behavior is that that job will end up into something we call the freezed state, which literally means it stops. Now, the good thing about that is that it also means that this platform never does anything like fire and forget. If it cannot perform, and if it after retry still cannot do whatever it's trying to do, the job will end up in the freeze state. Now, what's that result of that? Well, then it gives someone who is maintaining the solution, are given the chance to actually look at those freeze jobs, look at the error messages, perhaps, oh, I can see why this one went into a freeze state. It tried to connect to a service, to a target system that's unavailable, for instance. A very good example, right? Try to provision something to a service and that service is not running. Well, if you then fix that issue in Cell, then you can go into that job queue and look at that freeze job and say, hey, go ahead now, continue, because now it's not, I fixed the error, right? And hopefully that job will then complete and then it will be completed and everything works as it should. Now, if there are any other jobs that depends on that one, they will not continue if you have something that went wrong. So it was sort of realized I'm in a situation I can't continue, I can't complete what I was said to complete, but now it's fixed and then everything else will be completed. So it's kind of clever in that sense. It also means that you won't end up in that many situations where you have data inconsistency because we thought that we updated something, but we didn't, right? If we couldn't update it, it's not going to be completed, right? Do you have any comments on that, Simon?
On mute, sorry. I think you covered it all.
Yeah, thank you. So we mentioned this already, that we provide RESTful APIs. Now, we also provide Swagger services, and if you haven't used that, that's really convenient because then you could actually, from the web portal, we have a Swagger service for the low-level API, so that's obviously running on the app server component, and we have a Swagger service for the business API, obviously running on the API server. Now, if you want to try out the API, you can do that, and it will give you, first of all, what kind of endpoints we have available. And on the API documentation or the Swagger service on the app server, it's not endless because it is literally get or put or post on entity or entities. And also you can also run a script from it. On the business side of it, it's, I don't know how many endpoints it is. Have you looked, Simon? Hundreds.
Oh, hundreds, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Loads.
quite a few, but they are, on the other hand, uh, much more business friendly. Like as you see as this endpoint, for instance, run a send reminder. It's much more understandable than, for instance, as you see here, for instance, put an entity table UID event name, right? That's very generic. We are obviously going to generate an event for a specific object, right? Then you need to know exactly what table we're talking about, what event we're talking about, and so on and so forth, right? So this is more for techies, and this is more for the and as we said before, the business API is literally what we are using from the web portal itself. It's built on using these APIs, right? So you literally can build your own and web portal using the business API if you so wish, or
We had
modify the existing one, of course.
So we had a couple of questions yesterday around bulk loading or bulk updating, and we mentioned obviously that we can import delimited files to be able to do that. And you quite rightly said that we could also use the API. If you could
Yeah.
just zoom in again at the bottom one of that API, you can see there's basically a batch of, so create a batch of identities, run and put a batch of identities. You could actually, entities rather than identities. You can do that. So you can use the API to do sort of bulk updating or bulk loading of different objects within Identity Manager using the API server as well. And I think we did
Uh,
mention that yesterday, but that's just to show you where it's done.
well, it's actually on the app server, but the API on the app server. We can take a
API on
look
the
at
app server, yes.
it. So again, and the Swagger actually is really helpful, right? So you can test stuff, right? Obviously, you have to have the right to do this. You have to have the right with your actor to to use the API in the first place, and you also have the right to read or update the data you're trying to read or update. So you can't sort of circumvent the authorization model inside Identity Manager. Everyone uses the same role-based authorization model, the Identity Manager application roles, for instance, right? Now, there's a tool for everything, literally. And the first tool that everyone uses today, it hasn't been in the product forever, but it's been in the product for almost a decade now, right? 7 or 8 years or
At
something.
least I'd say, yeah.
We have a tool called the Launchpad, and that's actually, if you think, well, I'm an expert, I don't need the Launchpad. Even experts use the Launchpad, but it's so convenient. You authenticate to the Launchpad, and from the Launchpad, you have menus on the left-hand side, and there's some built-in menus, there's a tools menu, and there's a favorites menu. And if you want something to be a favorite, you simply right-click on whatever you want to have in your favorite list, and add to favorites will pop up. And if you go to favorites and right-click, then you can remove it from the favorites if you accidentally put something there that you don't want to have there, right? And you can search within it, of course, right? Almost every tool is presented inside the Launchpad, not 100%, but almost. And it's very convenient because once you have authenticated, and it uses the same authentication as you have for all the other, like the web portal. So you can have federated authentication into the Launchpad as well, if you so wish. Now, once you're in there, there's a lot of applications or tools that are available. Well, there are some main tools, and I would argue and say that the two ones you see at the top here, the Manager tool and the Job Queue Info tool, are definitely tools that you are going to use when you on your journey to learn more about Identity Manager. These two tools, the Manager tool and the Job Queue Info tools, they are literally, I'm not sure how much you looked at the demo yesterday, but whenever Simon was doing something, he actually had the Job Queue Info tool running in the background so he could see that things were happening in the system. Because what it does, it monitors the DB queue and all your job service queues. So you can see that they are executing things. And you can see also, of course, well, it hasn't executed yet, so I need to wait for it before I can continue because it needs to complete whatever it's told to do, right? And then there is a tool called the Analyzer, and the Analyzer is literally a role mining and role discovery tool. It's a separate graphical tool. It's very powerful, uh, but don't fool the customer into that corner and saying you can use your existing data to mine useful business roles. Because if the existing data is not extremely well in good shape, and it probably is not, because that's why they wanted to have a proper IGA solution in the first place. So there's been a long debate on role mining, and there are some new findings in the area as well. But as of today, I would argue and say that role mining is still, it can give you some templates, but you need to manually look at those roles. Otherwise, you're going to replicate things that are not necessarily correct for your customer's environment.
And I think you mentioned yesterday about the recommendations. So now we've got recommendations built into the product. They can look at roles, they can look at the existing members of that role, what entitlements they have, and make recommendations of potential other entitlements you want to add to that role. And it's kind of a more intelligent approach, perhaps, to mining and role discovery.
It is, but it's actually, technically, it's a bit similar to what the Analyzer will do for you anyway. However, and there is a documented use case in this lab guide because we have loaded some data into it where we have some people that are from a obviously everything is fake in the data in this demo lab, right? But it's a sort of, the story is that we have that the company has acquired another company, and those people have some entitlements, and maybe we can create roles based on what they already have. And that's, you do everything from the web portal, of course, with this new role recommendation feature. However, again, always be careful when it comes to role mining, because if your data isn't good, the roles cannot possibly be good, right? As an automatic result, you have to do some manual fine tuning of them, right? And then there's a tool called the license meter, and it's always fun to start it, right? You remember Susanne yesterday, she said, well, you can get not for resales keys for your, or product keys or license keys for your different products we have from One Identity. As a partner, you can do that. However, for the identity manager, you don't need a license key, which is, again, very much true. But the customers need to be able to at least see how many licenses are we using. And the license meter tool only works if you have configured your implementation and said, this is my production environment. The online demo center lab is not a production environment. So if you run the license meter, it would literally return 0, because you can have as many users you want in a test or a lab environment, or a the development environment or test environment. We can only look for license counts in a production environment. So it's pretty useless in the online demo center lab, or the Bootcamp lab. And then there is some tools for configuration. And I would say that the first 3 of these is probably something you are going to use quite heavily. Now, the synchronization editor that you saw Simon yesterday navigating in the synchronization editor, that's the tool we use to connect to target system, including, of course, systems that are authoritative, like an HR system. We use that synchronization for any kind of integration we have with target system or source data systems or authoritative sources. So that's definitely a tool you're going to have to play around with. It's wizard driven. And as you may have noticed yesterday when Simon talked about our built-in connectors, such as the AD one or the Entra ID connector we have, or the LDAP connector as examples. If you connect to your Active Directory, for instance, with the ID connector, you do not have to provide all the mappings because we already have templates built into it. So it will map everything sort of standard. The only time if you have an extended schema on the target system, if it's a well-known system, then you have to manage the extensions yourself, of course, right? It will find the extensions, but you need to also properly map them into Identity Manager. Now, as you saw Simon, he also showed you the connection to the HR system, which in this lab is just a database table. It's a flat table in a database. It will read that schema, so it will find everything on the target system, but it won't have any clue on how to map it into Identity Manager. That for that particular system, we have done the mapping completely manual, of course. The second tool that you're probably going to use a lot is the designer tool. That's the main configuration tool. That's the main development tool. That's the main tool you use to customize the solution. This is the tool where you can change the behavior of the database and how things relate to each other inside the database. And this is the tool you use to customize those technical workflows I talked about, those process change. You do that from the designer tool. And then there's a tool called the database transport tool. Now that's exactly that's the tool. You have to sort of learn how to use it. And it's not that hard if you do it properly. That's the tool you use when you want to move artifacts from configurations or customizations, whatever you have done with a solution in a development environment, to move those over to a test environment, for instance. And then you run your test. Definitely, John is going to talk about that later today. Then you run your test, or the customer run their tests. And once they find anything problematic or something that needs to be fixed, you go back to the development tool and you do whatever changes you need to do, adjustments, you create a new transport, move it to the test, and once you have cleared all the test use cases, you create a new transport in the development and you move that over to production. And hopefully everything works, right? Like a charm. So the database transport tool is a tool you use to move whatever you have between environment. And there is something built into it called the labeling. And labeling is definitely recommended to use. So whenever you want to create, whenever you save changes into the configuration or any customization you've done, you save it under a label. And then you take the data transport tool and then you say, give me everything from this label, make a package. The package itself is a zip file with XML documents inside of it. You move it to the next environment and then you deploy that label or that transport into that environment. So that's how you use the data transport tool. And we mentioned yesterday that we also provide a graphical report editor. You heard me saying that yesterday. That report editor is actually an OM version of Stimulsoft. So if you don't find our technical documentation sufficient for you to do whatever you want to do inside a report, if you Google, you could actually Google for Stimulsoft and you will find good examples on how to do clever things with a report editor, because it is literally a Stimulsoft report editor. And then there's some other tools that you will use. You will definitely use the job service configurator once you install the application, because that's the tool you use to configure the bootstrap information for a job server, that, that One Identity Manager service component. Now, you don't tell the job with that tool, you're not going to say that this job server is going to take care of connecting to Active Directory and connecting to Amazon or connect to SAP or connect to whatever target system. What you do with the tool is that you configure how does the job server connect to the identity management platform, and how often is it going to pull jobs from the queue, for instance, and where should it write its log output. That's typical things you configure with that tool. The rest will be fetched by the job server, because then inside the designer tool, you decide this particular job server is going to do these things, and therefore you configure sort of the capabilities of the job server is something you configure centrally. And then the job server will pick up anything it needs. And if it needs special binaries, it will actually grab them from the database, because we also store all the product binaries inside the database. So if you update a version of a library, such a DLL file needed, for instance, the job server will see, I need an updated version. I'm going to grab the new one from the database, and I'm going to restart myself. And guess what? Now I'm updated, right? So it's sort of self-updating themselves once they know how to connect to the identity management solution itself. Obviously, we have a web installer tool, so you can deploy your API server and your app server. We have a data import tool, which is useful, especially at early stages when you deploy identity management. You want to import data from the customer has data already. They want that data. Let's say that the customer, well, we have some roles in our old system. Well, can you export them in for instance, a CSV format? Yeah, we can, right? And then we can import those roles with a data import tool. And then there's a tool called the object browser, which is also very useful. It's like an expert tool, but it's very useful once you get hang of it. And there are more tools, of course, right? So with no further ado, let's go into the,
Maybe it's just important just to sort of round it off is that, yes, there's a lot of tools, and it may be confusing about which tool I use there. But the purpose of using these administrative tools is to make life easier, is to make it easier to configure things, to adapt things, to change things within the Identity Manager. As we said yesterday, Identity Manager is extremely flexible. It can do pretty much anything that you want it to do. That's why we provide the tools to enable it easier. Now, yes, it will take a bit of time to learn them, but once you've learned them, you realize and appreciate what they're actually providing for you.
Thank you, Simon. And I will go to full screen here, so hopefully. Can you now see a desktop?
I can see a desktop with a big boot footprint.
Okay.
And there's lots of thumbs up as well.
Yeah, perfect. So, again, this launchpad, we put the launchpad on the task bar down here. So if you have your own environment, just click on it. You need to authenticate. You could have, of course, integration to something where you need to, why is it so slow today? Come on, wake up. I'll wait for it. This is the not so good thing about our lab environment, the SkyTap cloud service, because sometimes it's not the fastest. And why doesn't it work now? That's a good question, right?
I'm guessing it's just that we haven't used it this morning. We didn't warm it up or anything, so I'm guessing it's that reason.
That could be it, right? Come on. Is the web portal working?
Hang on a second, just have a look and
yeah. See that it works.
All the servers are running.
Yeah. Well, it could be. Yeah. Let's see what happens. It's a bit. Yeah, the web portal works, and it seems like. Well, it will. Let's restart it once, just for the fun of it. So let's see if I can log on to the web portal just for the fun of it. Yeah, I could. Okay. So it's not dead. It's just slow then. Let's minimize that guy.
Probably SkyTap again.
Yeah, it is. Well, in the meantime, what you typically get when you have what we call the launch pad, right? It is task driven. So can you see if when it wakes up, Simon?
Yeah, I'm just going to do it in the background for you.
Yeah, thank you. So it is task driven. So there is a menu called tools here, and that will literally list all the tools.
You're good to go, mate.
Okay, it will list all the tools. However, if you click on manage, it will tell you. So now I'm going to log on. So I'm going to put in the password, and I can actually be a lazy dog here. No, I can't because I need to put in the password manually. I'm sharing the screen, so there's something wrong. That's in the way. I need to type the password correctly also.
That's always a bummer, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit picky. What?
Is it 200?
No, it's 100.
Okay.
No, OIBOOTKAMP 100 exclamation mark. Come on. Now it looks better at least. Yeah. So, what happened now?
No, that was just me trying to get out of it.
Let me go to full screen again. Lovely recording this. So if you look at it and you start with the installation overview, for instance, you can see that it will actually give you some hints here, right? The One Identity Management Service for database is installed. You can see the little green tick box, right? We haven't installed and enabled everything, right? Now, the web portal, it says that it's not installed because it refers to the old web designer portal. And we haven't even installed it in this lab. The application service is installed. We have not enabled encryption for the database. We don't want to do that in this lab, but this is typically what you want to do in a proper installation, of course. We have an SMTP host. We do have an email system. The staging level is still a development database. You can change it to production. We can't really see why. We can see some target systems. So we do have Active Directory configured. So if I click run here, it will open the synchronization project in the synchronization editor. So you don't have to know, oh, which tool should I use, right? If you click there, it will open the appropriate one. And as you can see, we have one for LDAP as well. We have one for Safeguard, our PAM platform. That's pretty useless to try to reconfigure because it's not there. And the same for the SAP one. And if you go down here, the HR system demo. If I click here, just for the fun of it, we start it. It will open the appropriate tool and the appropriate context, right? So it starts the sync editor now slowly, and it will load that HR. So if I go and take a look at the target system here, it is my HR system. So if I browse here, it is my HR system. I'm now live looking at actually grabbing data directly from the database system here. I can see that there is some Kyle here, for instance. And so it's very convenient. It doesn't mean that you can't click on the start page here and load another one, right? And you can also right click on it and say, I want to add it to my favorites, which I think I've already done because if I go to the bottom, I already have it here in my favorite list, right? So again, on manage, if you continue to the manage, display and maintain content data. That looks good, right? If I just that starts the manager tool. Analyze business roles. Well, that one will start the analyzer tool. Check system status. That looks cool, right? Well, that will run the job queue info tool and create a license report. You probably realized, but some of them, for instance, show deferred operations. Is that a tool? Well, if you hover, it will run the manager and open the deferred operation tool. Deferred operations are literally jobs that will be executed later. As you saw Simon yesterday, for instance, he said, I'm going to permanently disable my identity that I created, this Steve Bailey, I believe his name was. Well, what he didn't show you after he did a permanently disabled that identity record was that if he would have gone into the clicked here or in the manager tool, he can say show deferred operations. He would have seen that in 30 days, I will delete the Active Directory account for this particular individual. So it's
and maybe just to add to that is we talked about requests. We talked about requests that could be at some point in the future and also have an end date as well. That also is a deferred operation. It's deferred to when the start date arrives, and of course it's deferred when the end date arrives, and you see those operations in the manager tool.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. And also, if I select the configure and it said, I want to configure a new synchronization program. Well, now you already figured out, right? If you click on that one, it will open the sync editor, and it will also, in the sync editor, what it will do, it will click on this button, right? Start a new sync. What do you want to connect to, right? Now, the list here will be dependent on what modules you selected through when you installed it. So we do have a Unix connector, but we don't have a Unix or Linux target system. But this is how you connect to a Unix machine as an example, right? Now, again, configure a data import. Well, that sounds like it's going to run the data import and integrate the web service. Actually, something you can do inside the designer tool. That's for SOAP web services, not REST. Add or modify a job server. Change the system settings. I wonder what that is, right? Well, if I click on it, it will open up the tool called Designer. So let's start two tools, right? We start with the Manager tool. So we go here in Manage and we say, well, we definitely want to run the check system status. As soon as you are doing any labs or playing around, it's a good practice in your own environment to start this tool where you can see if there are anything going on. Now, you can click on this refresh and you can click on it and you can click on it, or you can right click on the job queue and say, I want to monitor it. And you can see that you're monitoring because there's a small arrow popping up on the left-hand side. And if that arrow is there, you are literally, for the moment, nothing. And you can see the DB down here. We can see what job service we have. We actually have two job services in this lab. We have, so I can say get status. I can see that we have one running on the Active Directory machine. That job server literally has nothing to do in this lab, but it's there because that was the job server that connected to our safeguard to synchronize safeguard data. But now it's just there. And then we have another job server called IAM server, and that's literally the job server that runs on the IAM server. That's the database machine where we have the SQL server running, where we have the IIS running. We only have one server in this lab, right? So we have two job servers, and I can see, are there anything in the queue, in the database queue? Nothing. Is there anything happening on the job queue right now? And no matter, it's not that weird because there are some schedules running, and for instance, every 10 minutes it will check if there are any uh, expired identities. That you don't have to run it every 10 minutes, but we do it because then you could go into the HR system, put an end date on a person, synchronize that, and 10 minutes later we'll find, hey, this person should be permanently deleted because he's gone or she has left the organization. However, for the moment, nothing is happening in the solution, but it's a good tool to have running. Another good tool to start, to start is, of course, the Manager tool. So let's start the Manager tool. You saw Simon and you saw me yesterday running the Manager tool. It's very simple to navigate this tool. It's clockwise the way you navigate in this tool. So it has menu options on the left-hand side. If they can't fit in the list here, you can literally, you can move this upwards and downwards. And as you can see, if you want to minimize it, it will be icons instead. And if the icons run out of space, you can see the rest of them here. So if I click on this guy and go up here, obviously there are no more here because these plus these are the only menu options we have available. And it's also dependent on the number of modules you have installed. And obviously, if I click on identities, I can click on something called the info system, and that will give me some dashboards about the menu option identities. And as you can see, there are some identities, and we can see that it's not that much happening in this system for a good reason, right? Identities without departments, we have 3 of them. We have 70s identities without cost center. External identities without manager, well, that's good, right? We have 0 of those. And as you can see, the mix between internals and external or internal is just a flag on the identity. But if we open up if you click on identities here, because I selected the menu, you get a list of the objects in this pane here. And if you double click on one of them, and this takes a bit time the first time you do it, when you start the tool, the next time it will be much quicker. Then you get this overview diagram on the thing you clicked on. So the center object is now the identity, and I clicked on this guy called Petri Ahola, a very Finnish guy. And as you can see, he is definitely in Finland, in Helsinki, in sales in Finland. And we can also see that this guy actually has some accountability. He has responsibility. Well, he's a manager of these individuals, right? And of course, you can just click on one of them. And now I'm looking at this particular Maria Kosonen, and she is obviously also in Finland, and she has Petri Ahola as a manager. I can then go back. So now I'm back at the view where I was, and obviously I can also click on the actual center object here to get more information. And then you get, and this is tab based, right? So there's more information here. This is information about the identity record. And if I want to do things about it, there's a tasks pane here. So I can look at the identity overview, for instance. I can deactivate it. I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to click on identity overview. And then I got that. I can look at the identity entitlement overview. That's a different overview diagram. I see the identity and I see, well, he has an Active Directory user account and he's a member of 11 groups. And he also has, and this is a mock-up offline system called Sales Report. He has an account in that system where he has an entitlement of being a user. If I want to know, are there any other users, I click on that particular one and I can then navigate, this is a group in the Sales Report system, and there are actually 42 user accounts that belong to the group user. So if I just randomly click this John Ridley here, I can see this user account belongs to the identity John Ridley, and I hope that you get the sort of the strength here that you literally can navigate around in this environment, and you can look at data, and you can track data this way. You can find things that you're really interested in, right? Now I want to see his Active Directory account. And not only do I want to see that he has these group memberships, I actually want to look at the Active Directory account itself. And you should recognize these kind of data because this is Active Directory specific data and some profile information and login information and remote access, terminal services, extensions. This, of course, means that you have to have these extensions in your AD. And this is something you get if you install Exchange back in the days, right? And obviously some more information about some street app. Why is there a data here? Simon, how come he has a street information on his AD account?
I'm guessing because he's got a location of London.
That's very probably right. Yeah. Okay, so that's why. And he has some contact information. He has where's his phone number coming from?
Maybe that's also a location of London.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool, right? So this is sort of looking at identities. If you click on the plus sign, there are some filters here. So you can, for instance, if you want to look at certain identities with alphabetical, the names of them, you can open up departments and you can open up the demo. You can go to IT, and I believe now IT Sweden to find the. Or did you move him back again? Maybe you did.
No, if it's Stephen, it's.
Oh, he's up there at the top. Look,
Yep.
Steve Bailey. Steve Bailey is in that organization. You recognize this guy from yesterday. He was the person that was created obviously by Simon. And he has an LDAP account as well. And he has an AD account. So, and if you want to see his entitlement overview, well, he has some groups in LDAP and he has some groups inside Active Directory, and he has 2 user accounts and nothing else. And they are actually real target systems because the LDAP and the Active Directory are live and running, right? So that's the identity side of things. You can also look at organizations, and obviously, if I do a hierarchical view, you can actually see that we do have, for instance, if I go to IT UK or IT Sweden here, I can see the department IT Sweden. I can see that, okay, if you're a member of IT Sweden, you inherit a standard LDAP account and a group called IT Sweden. That sort of makes sense. And obviously, there are some primary assigned ones. And one of them is, of course, Steve Bailey, because he happens to be, his primary department is IT Sweden. I could also see that it's Lisa Svensson, who she is the manager of it. If I click on it, I can enter more information about the organization IT Sweden. And as you can see, there are some spare fields. We do provide spare fields for a lot of objects, so you don't have to extend the schema until the spare fields are not useful anymore. And you can change the display name. So if you want this to be the shoe size, right, you can, of course, right? Now, the same goes for locations. So if I open up locations and cost center structures, I do have a hierarchical cost center structure. As you can see, if I click, there is a cost center called 100 with a parent one called a 10 for Sweden. So there is a hierarchical, and you can build as many hierarchies as you want. However, just for the fun of it, our locations are actually right now a flat structure, but you can definitely have sub locations. But in this demo lab, it's completely flat. So if I do find, for instance, Stockholm, I look at the location Stockholm, most likely we're going to find a Steve Bailey, because he's located, he is definitely located in Stockholm. So and if I look at the location Stockholm, I can see things like he has an address, this address here, and it looks like we haven't updated it, Simon, because didn't he have Guild Street in London?
Yeah, but that's because you picked on a different user, not Steve Bailey.
Yeah, I took someone else. Yeah,
Yes.
You're right. So we have a street address that we put on the location. We also put in the country, and we have some office phone number. So
But Steve
obviously,
should have those addresses
yeah,
if you go back to Steve.
yeah, let's do that. Let's take a look at Steve again, and we go to Steve. Where is he? Steve Bailey, and we go to his Active Directory account, and we open up the Active Directory account, and we take a look at his identification. Yes, he's got the right one, right? So obviously he's located here, and therefore also his AD account has been updated appropriately. So this was just identities and organizations. For the fun of it, we have the same thing for business roles. And you remember, we need to create every of these menu items have something called basic configuration data. That's something that relates to the menu option itself. And if I look at organizations, there is basic operating data, basic configuration data here as well. And if I look at business roles, there's definitely role classes. And as you can see, we have 4 different role classes. 3 of them we have created in this lab, and one of them is called job roles. And the job roles has 65 business roles. And the job roles itself, if I look at the role class, it's obviously inherited top down. And what can I assign to the roles? Well, almost everything inside, not everything that's available, but we have something selected for this job role, this job class. And obviously, once I have a role class, I can actually open up the roles directly from the job classes up here. And I can see all my roles, but they are literally hierarchical. So under IT, for instance, and you have to keep me honest, was he a DBA Oracle nowadays?
I think he changed
Yeah.
to Oracle, yes.
Yeah, so you can see that Steve Bailey here exists. He is a primary member of the DBA Oracle role. And if you have an Oracle role, you have a standard LDAP account. So there's 2 reasons why he has an LDAP account now, but it also has this group. So if we look again for the fun of it at Steve Bailey, he has 2 groups inside his LDAP account. And obviously, One of them is because he's a Linux admin, he's an Oracle DBA, and also a team. There's actually 3 reasons why he has the LDAP groups. That's kind of funny, right? Because if you want to remove it from him, you have to remove all the reasons why he has it, right? Now, that was business role. Entitlements is everything that is an entitlement inside target system. So if you click on here, you could, for instance, click on Active Directory groups. You see all the 80 groups, regardless of how many ADs you have integrated. You can have 50 different domains if you want, right? But I only have one here. These are all the groups we have. There's some 200 groups or something inside the solution right now. If I look at PAM user groups, these are groups from that safeguard. If I look at LDAP groups, these are all the groups we have synchronized from the LDAP system. If I look at SAP groups, we don't have that many SAP groups or SIP groups. SAP profiles, we have much more of those, right? It's some 1,300 or something. And obviously SAP roles, we have quite a few. There are so many, so it won't list them because there are 6,821 of them. So you need to have some kind of search criteria here to be able to see all of them. And if you continue down, we can see we have one login. And this is where you find technical roles. That's called system roles. So we have one system role configured here for the fun of it. It's called password requester. It's a system role, and you can see that it has a service item, and it's also published in the IT administrator shop manager approval. So this is where it's published. This is what it looks like when it's published. These are the entitlements that comes with it, and these are identities who actually have access to this system role. So, and it's not a member of a business role, but you can make it a member of a business role if you so wish. You saw Simon yesterday looking at the IT shop. So we have all the IT shops here, like the employee shop that we have created. This is the shop. These are the shelves. These are the people who have access to this shop. And on each shelf, there are different things published, of course. We looked at attestations from the web UI yesterday. You could also look at it from here. So you have your attestation policies here. Now there are filters. You can look at the predefined ones. These are the one out of the box. And these are the one that are custom defined. It's not that many. And the one we looked at yesterday was demo 80 group memberships from request. So this is the attestation policy that we actually created inside the web portal being BenP. Audit rules, we looked at it yesterday. We had a rule called account payable and account receivable. And now there's no one violating the rule for a good reason. We took her out of violation yesterday, Brittany Peters. I resolved the rule violation, so there's no one violating the rule anymore in this particular lab. We also have company policies here. Now, we're not going to go deeply into risk index function. It's enabled in the lab. If you want to change the behavior on how risk is calculated, you do that here. You open up the risk index functions, and depending on what you want to look at, and as you can see, there is a lot of them, then you could, for instance, saying that Active Directory group memberships, if you look at Active Directory user accounts here, and if we open that one up, we can look at, for instance, what's going to happen if we are attesting and saying approved to an attestation of a user account, for instance, then, well, what's going to happen is that we're going to decrease the risk with 0.05. So this is how you can sort of change the behavior of risk management if you so wish, right?
It may be just worthwhile while you're talking about risk, just go to Active Directory and go to perhaps AD administrator, because you assign risk to any entitlement. It could be assigned to a role. It can be assigned to a.
You want
AD
this
group.
tool or what
No,
do you want?
No, Active Directory. So Active Directory.
Okay,
in
let's
Manager,
go to Active Directory down here.
And then go to groups.
We go to groups.
And then, I don't know, pick on administrators, the third one down.
Ah.
And then pick on go and see the master data. And you can see that we have we haven't set it here, but obviously this is going to be a high risk. So we can set the risk score value to 1, or the highest it possibly can go, or to whatever you want.
0.9 is high enough, right?
But
let's say that.
What will happen now is that anybody that's actually been assigned, or any account that's been assigned, and any person identity that's also been assigned that account, that's a member of the administrators group, will have an elevated risk score. The system would automatically score an identity's risk based on the entitlements that have been assigned to it. And as I say, you can assign risk.
You should probably do it to domain admins, right?
Oh, I think you should do it to a lot of us. We haven't really used it in this demo environment.
No.
But yeah, I mean, that's how the whole risk thing works. And as Ingvar was showing you, in terms of those other risk, what are they called? Risk?
It's risk assessment.
Risk assessment. So
yeah.
Yes, okay, you have a risk score of 1 because, of course, you've got the domain admin or the administrators group. You're a member of that group. But if it's been attested, then of course you could automatically reduce that score because someone has agreed it's correct. It is applicable to whatever job that you've got. So that's how we can use risk scoring and associating risk to different entitlements within the identity management system.
So again, as you saw, when I logged into the Launchpad, I logged in with a system user called IAMadmin, which is a full admin. It's an admin that has all the rights, so you can literally configure things here directly if you so wish, right? But this was just a sneak peek into the manager tool. Now, let's say that you want to configure something in the solution instead. We have looked at this sync editor tool. Let's go to the tools and go down and say, because this is just listing all the tools, let's run the designer tool. I want to show you a couple of things in the designer tool before we sort of take the next section. And you have to keep me honest, probably with a good time to have a break at 11, I think. What do you think, Simon? I'm trying to take a look at the watch.
Yes, we're 10 to 10, which is obviously 10 to 11 CET. We've got a question that's come in. I tried to answer it. I'm just trying to read it. It's come back. Is it Rudger? Is it possible to unmute yourself and just explain what the question is that you're trying to do?
Yeah, actually, but it goes back to the database, what do you call that, transporter. So is it okay if I take it now?
Sure.
Okay. Actually, I was asking, I had asked, sometimes it happens, I've seen in a couple of clients that the environments go out of sync. I mean, test, dev, and production. So when you talked about database transporter, I just thought, can this tool be used for syncing the environments? Here, by syncing, I do not mean authoritative source and IDM sync. No, I mean environment syncing. So because we are bringing in changes from test to dev to test and then to production. So can it be used to for the environment syncing as a whole?
Yes, that's what I tried to mention in the first part of that response to the question was, yes, you could use labeling, and sometimes what people do is they actually version those labels as a way of actually knowing what version is actually within each system. So if you're starting to make configuration changes and you're using versioning of those labels, then you promote it from your development environment to your QA department and then into your production environment. So what you're trying to do is obviously go from the bottom, being obviously the development environment, and then you go into test, and obviously if there's any issues, go back to obviously to the development environment, fix the test. Once you're happy in your test environment, then you can promote it into production. So production obviously is always the productionized code. It's always the one that's been tested. It's always agreed. If something starts to go out of sync, it most probably will do, because you're going or constantly most probably updating things from your development environment to your QA test environment. But you can always promote changes up to the production when you obviously want to do so. Does that answer your question in terms of trying to keep things in sync?
Simon, if I may add, because this is quite a common question that I get asked from partners and from customers, even to the extent where they say, we want to clone production and push it back to test to get them both on the same file.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, historically and from a best practice, you should be doing what Simon said. You should be going from dev to test and then testing, and then eventually from dev to production. And there will be many transport packages that are included in any implementation, because there's more than one person working on specific functionality. And as you attack that from a project perspective, there will be different people wanting to promote different things into production and then run into a UAT testing environment and then push it into production. So it's more of a business process and a best practice more than the technology. But of course, the technology, the transport packages will allow you to take some configuration and customization that, as Simon said, and push that into an environment. Yeah. Now, also, you should also take backups at regular intervals. You should take backups when you're doing these transports, when you're doing UAT testing, when you're doing production testing. The only downside of doing the backups is you can't take a backup from a dev environment and expect to push it into production, because there's different encryption algorithms and all the endpoints will be different. Whereas the way you do it through a package is when you build that transport package, it allows in that XML file to have the system variables of the other target systems in production. So it is the way to do it. A long story short, it is the way to do it with transports, but you have to manage and manage the best practices of those transports. So a combination of transports and backups, locally backups, is the way to keep them in sync. Because there is no way of taking a backup, a complete backup of something like production and pushing it into UAT. Because of course the backups also include data and everything. It's everything that's in the database, whereas you don't want to be doing that because that's production data and you don't want to be touching production data. But the configurations should be done through transports. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and also just a comment there, right? We do, especially if you're talking about a test environment, you might want to have exactly the same data, not exactly the same, but you want to represent objects that are similar. You can transfer data between environments with a synchronization project, because if I click here, there is a sync, there is a connector that connects to One Identity Manager. So this connector is a way to connect one environment to another environment. I'm saying it with, you need to do it with a lot of caution, of course, right?
A lot of caution. Yeah.
A lot of caution.
Not many people do that.
Yeah, but you can. And if that's the only way to move data objects from, let's say you want to have test data in your development environment, and it's so hard to, can we export it? Yes, you can. But can we import it? Well, some of it is probably possible to have a connector between the environments to sync objects. And then you need to be very careful of the direction, of course, right? You're not going to write any data to the production environment. That's probably not a good idea, right?
I've seen that used more for development, where there's multiple development environments with multiple developers working on two separate instances of Identity Manager, and they want those to be kept in sync.
Yeah, that's also a very good example, of course, right? And it's a very powerful connector, because it literally can connect to anything from one environment to another. You have to know what you're doing, but you can, right? I'm not saying that you should. There's a difference between should and can.
There are occasional use cases where you can.
There are use cases for it.
You want specific, artifacts that you want to be in both systems or two separate systems. So can be used, but be careful.
Thank you very much.
Again, I just started the designer tool. The designer tool, it's a different thing, because if we look at the manager tool, and let's say that I go to an identity here, and why don't we find Mr. Steve Bailey here for the fun of it? And I go into Steve Bailey, and then I say, well, I want to change his, for instance, let's put in a description on Steve Bailey. This is the Steve, right? And then I save this, and the save is a button, right? Because I'm looking at the data object. The data object in this case is Steve. So there's a save button in the manager tool. Now I'm not sure if this is going to trigger any updates. Maybe it will when the job, it's just now waiting to see if there's anything in the DB queue. However, if I go back to the designer tool, there is no save button because this, instead we commit the changes we do here into the database. Now we can look at configuration parameters, and there's quite a few of them here, as you can see, and we have some common settings, and they could be also, of course, hierarchical. These parameters we can look at, for instance, the QER, where we can configure different behavior for attestations. We can configure different behavior for instance, the IT shop, some setups for the IT shop. For instance, we could, which we haven't configured here, but we can auto-publish, for instance, where's ADS? Active Directory groups,
Yep.
right? If we want to, whenever we synchronize with AD, we're going to publish new groups directly into the IT shop, for instance, right? Now, these settings sometimes means, and you can actually see this in this table, if it will require a compilation. Now, we use the phrase compile the database. That's not true, right? We compile content inside the database because also from this tool, we can go to process orchestration and we can go to the script library. Scripts are literally code that are referred to from processes. It can be referred to from a lot of things. And if you change a script, or if you change a process, or if you change the behavior in the schema, and it turns out, and you commit that change, and that's where you can assign that label, by the way. And if you commit the change, there are obviously you're doing code changes or you're changing something that has dependencies to codes. The system will detect that and it will stop processing and wait for you until you compile those changes. It's called compile the database, but literally you're compiling content inside the database because it is code. Everything is stored in the database, right? So if we, for the fun of it, start with the schema here, I click on schema, and then I can see, okay, so we have a schema. We have 828 tables. We have 26 disabled one, and the disabled one are typically disabled because either we don't use them or they are a bit sort of obsoleted, but they are not removed from the database. Now, on the left-hand side, these are the tables that are actually, and you don't have to learn this schema. After a while, you're going to get familiar with some of the tables, and it's sort of consistent in the way the naming conventions and relationship tables typically have these naming conventions, but no one understands everything about the schema because, again, depending on the number of modules you install, this number can be way over 1,000 tables inside the solution itself. You could also go up here and click on tables, and that will give you a full list of the tables here. And then you could just type in, for instance, if I search for, I click here first, and I just type person. I type per, actually. It will find the table person. And guess what? It contains all the identities. So now I can click on the tasks pane. Now the task pane is up here to the right. I can say, show the table definition. That opens up the table person and shows all the columns we have for a person. There's quite a few of them, as you can see. I could also, if I want to see a table overview, I can click on table overview. Now I can see the person table as this hyperview instead, and I can see there is 113 columns. And the table itself listens to these events. It has processes assigned for the insert event and for the update event and for actually 13 other events, because as you remember when I said with typical events are insert, update, and perhaps delete. We don't have a delete event for this table. However, you could also have other events happening that this table, if this event occurs, it will the process associated with the event will then evaluate should I or should I not execute. Now, I could also directly from this this view go down and let's take a look at the a simple one, the street, which is literally an address field. I'm looking at the column now, the column street in the person table, and I can see that there are obviously permission groups. That's the internal authorization model. So these groups can read or write to this column. However, I could also from this see, hey, there is column results from, and we have something called column effects. I'm going to use Simon's favorite thing. If I change the street value on the person, it will have a knock-on effect on the street address. If you have Azure, Active Directory user, or Entra ID as it's called today, if you have Active Directory, it will update the street address column or attribute in Active Directory and also on the contact. If you have an LDAP account, and this depends on the modules you have installed, right? If you have an LDAP account, the street attribute will be updated. Okay, so if I update the street address, it will have a knock-on effect on these columns in this case target systems. However, we could also see that, well, if we look at the tables, any column that starts with UID underscore refers to foreign keys in other tables. So obviously there is a UID locality that is literally the column that refers to your primary location. So obviously, depending on if you have a primary location, it will grab the street value from your location. So that's literally how it works. Now, if we want to take a look at the code, we can click on it and open up that particular column. Now we're back in this view and we are seeing the street column here. We can see some information about the column itself. If I bring this up a bit, we can see that now we are looking at a database table where we store identities. We can see that the column is, well, it's called, the column name is street and the display name, the English display name is street. If you have other language packs installed, and out of the box we have English and German, but you could also install like a Swedish language pack, for instance, or a Spanish language pack, then you can see what it's actually called in the local language. It's not called street in German, it's Straße, right? However, we could also look at some more information. Well, we have enabled logging. We want to audit changes to the street address on this. And it's also multi-line, so we can have more than one line on the street. Now, the really cool thing is the value calculation. This is often referred to as the template on a column in the database. A technical name is actually this is value calculation template for the column itself. Now, if you look down here, and this is a super simple out-of-the-box example. The only thing we have changed, because we can see there's a little tool here with a wheel, it means that we have put in and enabled overrides. Overrides literally means that if the street address is changed on the location, we will grab that change and update the value inside the person table. And the code, as you can see, we looked at if the length of the UID locality column, is there a UID locality column? Yes, there is. This is the UID locality column, the primary location. If the length is more than 0, it means that this individual, the person has a primary location. Then grab the value, the street column value from the primary location. Now this may look a bit, you can also click on this little to get a bigger editor, if you so wish. What we're using here is something called the object walker. I'm not going to save this now, but if you issue what you need to return is value I can't say value equals. Come on, equals and then something, right? Whatever. However, if you type in a $sign, it will bring up on the table you're in, and I'm in the person table, it will bring up all the available columns. So if I say, for instance, employee type here, and I just double click on it. Now, it will first take the street, but if I save this and compile it, it will actually return the employee type as the value on the street, which is a bit dumb, of course, right? It's called the object walker because if I type the dollar again and I just go down to everything that starts with UID, there's one that's not a foreign key. It's actually the UID itself so there is something called UID locality. That is literally the internal unique ID of the location. But anything else, like for instance, if I go to the UID, where is it? UID locality, and I click on the right key, it will open up that table and the columns inside that particular table. And if I want to have, for instance, not the street, instead I want to have the owner, which is called person head, and I want to have the first name of the person who is the manager of that location. So I just go down here until I find first name. This is silly, I realize that. Now, if I save this and remove the first if condition because it doesn't make any sense now because I'm overriding it with value equals, this will literally return the first name of the person who is the manager of the primary location of the person. And anyone understands this? Everyone? Can I give a thumbs up if I make sense?
I've got one, two.
I got a couple of them.
3,
right?
4.
Brilliant.
That's 5. Yeah, everyone understands you, Ingvar.
So obviously I didn't change it now because that change would have been technically literally stupid, right? You don't want the manager's name on the street address, right? However, let's go back to the manager tool for the fun of it, and we go to Steve Bailey here, and we are going to open him up for the fun of it, and we're going to go to the address, and we're going to give him another address. And you remember we put him in Malmö instead, in Sweden. And as you can see, it recalculated the phone, the fax, the street. You see this one? This is the street, right? And also some zip code and the city, and the country is still the same. It got it from the primary location. If I save now, what's going to happen to the Active Directory account and the street address column or attribute? Well, guess what? I press save and I monitor what's happening in the background. Well, there is some job waiting right now, but in a bit, hey, we have, let's see where it, there you go, an Active Directory update. It's going to update my Active Directory, and it's also going to update LDAP. So there's a couple of things going on here. It's processing the update. So just for the fun of it, if I now we open up
move off there, Ingvar, sorry. It's called ad hoc projection. Effectively, what that's doing is it's calling your synchronization project. So Ingvar earlier on showed you the synchronization project. We saw the arrows going left and right as well. That's what ad hoc projection really means there. It's calling the configuration of that synchronization project and then obviously updating it accordingly to the mappings that you've got in the project.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And now, thank you very much. And now, if I go and take a look at my ADOC, and I do find him again, and he's, I can just find Steve B, right? Or Steve. See if there are more than one. Steve Bailey. And I take a look at his address, and it's now in Malmö. because that's how it works, right? So everything, sort of the magic, happens inside the value calculations. And some of them are really straightforward out of the box, like this one. But if we, for instance, take a look at how do we calculate the central account, that central user ID, well, that code is a bit more sort of, it has more things into it, actually also modified, because what it will do, it will check something first and it will look, should I or should I not run in this case, it will run a script to calculate the value. So this is a script that we have in the script library here that will do the actual calculation. So it depends. It can be simple or it can be complex, of course, right? Now, again, so that's the how we calculate things, and out of the box, if you have a standard connector, it will also provide standard value calculation that you can modify if you so wish.
While we're in the schema, can I just recommend one thing? We talked yesterday about delete delays, and somebody was asking a question of how can we extend it. If we just extend the tables and go and find perhaps ADS account, which is the table required for Active Directory.
I click on all and I say ADS account, so I find it there. I show the table definition.
And then if you go to More tab, there you can see the deferred delete delay. So that's the standard, that's the default. That's why we were mentioned yesterday that there was the count itself wasn't going to be deleted.
What about 32,000, right? 365,000. Then that's the same thing as saying that we're not going to delete them, right?
Yes.
At least not as long as I'm alive, right?
If you put it to
the
zero,
default one is 30.
Yes. 0 means it will immediately delete it, and obviously 30 days is 30, and if you extend it to something a bit more sensible than 30, it would obviously take that value. And then one last thing perhaps to mention, again, just if you, I don't know, click on company, I don't know, hopefully it's there. And then if you go to more, okay, you can also see there's a line down there, so we can log the changes. In this case, we're not logging the changes if the company value changes, but there's a line that says contains name properties for password checking. So if you wanted to extend the complexity criteria of your password to say, I don't want it to be the certain value of attributes, in this case, the company name, then you can just click that button, and then the person can't choose One Identity as their password, because that's the value effectively of their company. So that's how you could also extend complexity in password rules as well.
Thank you, Simon.
And then maybe the last thing there is we saw Ingvar using the manager tool, and there was wizards that we did to build rules and conditions. Some of those attributes just don't appear by default. If you want perhaps to use the Active Directory account company in a rule for whatever reason, and you can't see it, that's the reason. It's not shown there. It's not shown in Wizard. You click on that, click Save, and then, of course, you can use it in your Wizards.
No, click Commit to Database.
Well, okay, Save, Commit to Database. Yes, tomato.
And if it needs the compilation, it will actually stop and ask for a compiler.
Yes, exactly.
So this was the schema, right? And again, if I go and take a look at, we are looking at the inactive,
Sorry, there was just one thing I was going to just add, is we can also enforce the values. So it may be that you want to say, I have an attribute and I only want it to be specific values and nothing else. Then we can also do that for each attribute as well. Just click on
I can give you an example, for instance. If I go to the person table and I go to, for instance, the identity type, there's value settings here. These are the only available values. It could be apprentice, consultant, contractor, customer, employee, manual, other, or partner. If you want more, you can add more. And then you need to commit that changes. Otherwise, you're not allowed any other value for employee type than these pre-configured ones. But you could always change it, right? You could always add more to it. And you can disable existing ones if you don't want them to be like, we don't accept anyone inside this solution who is an employee, which is probably a bit dumb, but you can. Sorry. Now I wanted to show you something else here. I'm going to go to the Active Directory account table again. I'm going to look at the table overview. Now, Active Directory account table probably have events for inserts, for updates, and for deletes. Now, if we look at the inserts, we have 3 different processes assigned to the insert, and we have one disabled one. Well, as you can see, we have a process called CCC, which is, Simon, stands for?
Custom configuration change.
Yeah, we have a custom configuration change for the insert. So let's click on it. So this is the process. I'm just an overview so far. It's a process on the ADS account that listens to the insert event. If I click on the process, it will literally open up the process. This is a copy of the standard process called ADS account insert. What we have done in this lab, at the end, we have added a step, and that step is enable mailbox in mail enable. What is that? Well, in this lab, we do not have Microsoft Exchange, and the reason is simple. It consumes way too much resources. So we have a very lightweight mail system running. And if you go up here and we go to the One IM server here, and I need to click Control Alternate Delete. And ideally, I can't do that. I need to provide a password, which is 200 instead of 100. I log in here. So what we have running on this this IM server, this is the machine where we literally run. I don't want that. Come on. Doesn't matter. This is where we run the database. This is where we run the web server. That's where we have the job server installed. And this is the IM server machine. Now, on this machine, we also have a mail server called Mail. We have a free version. Come on. Where is it? Mail enable. Open it up. There you go. We have this mail server running. And this has a web portal interface. You saw Simon yesterday. He actually opened it up. So we have configured one post office here called the imdemo.com. And inside this, we have mailboxes. And if I look at the mailboxes, these are the mailboxes we have. And most of them are enabled. As you can see, there's not that many messages inside those. And you can see that Steve B here has a mailbox. How did we create that mailbox? Well, what we have done, we have configured that use the integrated Windows authentication for the imdemo.com, and we have said automatically create a mailbox if successful login. So if you authenticate with your AD account to the Active Directory, a mailbox will be created automatically. Now, how did I do this in this particular lab? There you go. I need to do something. Come on. Let's go to the client again. Let's bring this up in full screen. So what I did was, well, there's no provisioning thing, but I added a step at the end. And now you need to hold your horses. I added a step at the end called enable mailbox and mail enable. And if I look at the, I'm using a PowerShell component execute script. There are other things you can do, of course. These are the methods. These are the things that a step can execute. And I want the PowerShell component execute script. And if I look at my parameters for this one, well, I can double script. I have a script generating script. So this is a VB.NET that generates a PowerShell, and at the end, I execute that PowerShell. And what I do, since I'm creating an Active Directory account, I actually we use a fixed password when we create the Active Directory accounts. So I will literally send an email to myself, being that new AD account will send an email to itself that contains the subject is welcome to the mail system, and the body, the content of the email will be, this is your mailbox. And since I'm sending something to myself, and this mail enable is configured to create the mailbox when you authenticate against AD, guess what? It will create the mailbox. That's not proper provisioning, right, Simon? But it works when you can't. There's no interface to talk to, right? The free version of Mail Enable has no API available, right? So this is a horribly simple way of doing it. So that's what we put into this lab. So obviously, if you create an AD account now, it will create a mailbox from this otherwise standard process. So this is the process steps that happens when you create an Active Directory account. And some of these steps are have conditions in them, right? So it might be that it's not going to run because we're not going to send the mail with the account name to the nearest manager or something. So it depends on things, but it will execute all the way down to the last step, and that last step will create the mailbox and Mail Enable. So these are the processes. Can you create your own process? Yes. Can you copy an existing process? Yes. And if you want to copy an existing process, if I just grab one randomly here, Active Directory app role read, for instance, if I open that, I'm not going to do it. If I want to make a copy of this process, this is a standard process, I say process and I say copy. And this wizard will literally say, I want to rename the process steps. I want to copy all the events, and I want to, and this is the important one, I want to disable the source process. So if I now continue here, I will have a copy of this process, and I will disable this one, and my process will then replace the standard process. And that's a pretty simple way of changing the behavior of the product, but you're not destroying everything, right? Anything. Or, well, you can destroy it because you can completely then do something that's wrong, right? But you're not destroying the system per se, right? And obviously, just as a final thing to show you here, there are script libraries. All the scripts are in here, right? If you have any custom scripts, I'm not sure we have. Yeah, we have a couple of custom scripts here as well. And there is quite a few.
I don't think they're used anymore, to be fair. I think we must.
No, they are probably not used by anyone, right? But this is typically, if I open up this script, it's an old one, and it's VB.NET code, of course, right? And if you're writing scripts and you press the F2 button, you can have examples. So if you want to have some examples from the object layer, I want to do a collection, and I want to get a collection from the database, you get sort of a script snippet, code snippet, so you know what to do, right? So it's very helpful when you write your own scripts, and this is available whenever there is possibility to write code into the product, right? However, finally, just for the fun of it, if I go to a table again, and I just say, for instance, I search for the person table, and I do a table overview. And now this is the person table. You remember these are the events, these are the columns, and so on. I can say, show the table person inside the schema. And this is horrible if you have, let's close that guy and that guy so we see as much. And then we can zoom out a bit with the minus here. So we are literally looking at the person table. We see all the relationships, and you want to be really busy. This is more, right? Just so you get a notion of, are there any tables in Identity Manager, and do they relate to each other? And the answer is, of course, in this case, yes. So that's actually was the things that at least I plan to show in this section. I'm not going to do anything, change the changes I made there. Is this a good time to have a break?
So, yes. We've been going for 2 hours. We've got 1 thumbs up, 2 thumbs up.
So let's go for a break.
Now we're getting lots of
15
thumbs
minutes.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. People probably need a break now. And then we only have a couple of short sections, and then we're going to hand over to Rito, I guess. Yeah. So should I bring up that perhaps that waiting thing? See if I can find it first.
Oh, you want to see? I already brought the timer up if you wanted to. If you wanted to.
I have it already.
Okay, because I'm already sharing, but never mind.
Okay.